Understanding human behavior through a biblical and psychological lens is vital, especially when it comes to relationships and attraction. While many see physical touch merely as a reflex or social norm, in truth, it is one of the most powerful forms of nonverbal communication. When a woman is drawn to a man, her gestures, particularly the areas she chooses to make contact with, are often not random. They are subtle messages spoken through the body, and for the man who is attentive, wise, and spiritually discerning, they provide insight into the heart of the interaction. Recognizing this allows us to not only understand what's happening in the moment, but also to approach these moments with emotional intelligence and spiritual responsibility. The first keynote reminds us that when a woman touches a man, particularly in specific ways or places, it is often the expression of something deeper than what the world might label as simple flirtation. These moments can reveal interest, trust, comfort, and often attraction. However, we must approach these interpretations carefully. The goal is not to read into every action with suspicion or overanalysis, but to recognize the natural ways in which people express relational closeness, and to do so with a heart anchored in self-control and clarity. From a psychological perspective, touch is one of the first senses we experience in life, and it remains a central way through which we receive affection, safety, and affirmation. Therefore, when someone chooses to make physical contact, even briefly or lightly, that action typically carries emotional weight. The areas a woman may touch when attracted, such as the arm, the shoulder, or the chest, each speak a different kind of message. These are not random acts, but carefully chosen gestures that can either encourage or confuse, depending on how they're received. In everyday life, this might look like a woman touching a man's arm during a conversation, seemingly to emphasize a point, but actually as a way of inviting connection or signaling comfort. She may place her hand on his shoulder or back when walking beside him or laughing at something he said, not just out of habit, but possibly to communicate, "I feel close to you." The man who is unaware of these cues might ignore them or misinterpret them entirely. But the man who has learned to observe, to reflect, and to remain grounded in purpose will understand that these are moments that carry both opportunity and responsibility. Understanding these patterns is not about manipulation or control. It is about awareness. Just as we are called to be good stewards over our words, our time, and our resources, we are also called to be good stewards over our bodies and our responses in relationship. For a man to receive a woman's touch, whether playful, sincere, or affectionate, he must first know who he is in Christ. Only then can he respond not with ego or pride, but with maturity and discernment. Only then can he honor the woman's dignity while honoring his own moral and emotional boundaries. Too often, people step into relationships without understanding the meaning behind the behaviors that mark the early stages of connection. And so they misread overstep or underappreciate what is really going on. But when we stop and learn what the body is saying, when we consider the motivations behind a simple touch, we begin to view attraction not as a game, but as a language that, when understood, brings clarity, mutual respect, and direction. In a world that celebrates impulsiveness and physical gratification, the ability to observe with restraint and respond with wisdom is rare. But it is precisely that rarity that makes it valuable. Recognizing where and how women express interest through touch does not mean a man must act on every signal. Instead, it gives him a framework to evaluate the depth, the sincerity, and the timing of what may be blossoming. It gives him a chance to pause, to reflect, and to seek God's guidance before stepping further. And so, in every interaction, whether simple or complex, let us remember that human behavior is never just surface level. It is layered with meaning, emotion, and often spiritual implication. As we observe the ways attraction is expressed, may we be men who understand, not just to know, but to act in a manner that honors ourselves, the women we engage with, and the God who created us both. Attraction is a natural part of the human experience. God designed us as relational beings, capable of feeling, noticing, and being drawn to one another in unique and beautiful ways. But attraction, like any other gift, must be understood within its proper context. When we speak of a woman showing signs of interest in a man, perhaps even through a small, intentional touch. We are not just observing human behavior, we are seeing part of the larger story of how relationships begin, develop, and either flourish or fall apart. The second keynote calls us to consider the purpose of attraction, especially physical attraction, within the framework of God-ordained relationships. To some, it may seem strange to speak of physical attraction in the same breath as spiritual wisdom, but they are not opposed. In fact, the Bible is filled with examples of human relationships that began with interest, appreciation, and even romantic pursuit. What matters most is not whether attraction exists, but how it is handled. Where is it pointing? What is its intention? And more importantly, how does it align with the values and standards that God has set for relationships? Touch is often the outward expression of inward interest. It's a signal, a way of saying, I see you, or I'm drawn to you, without speaking a word. And when a woman chooses to make physical contact with a man, especially in specific and meaningful ways, she may be expressing more than just friendliness. She may be communicating emotional openness, curiosity, or even a desire for something deeper. But here's the key: in a relationship ordained by God, attraction has a place, but never the highest place. It is a part of the picture, but never the whole. When we allow attraction to drive us without restraint, we risk building something shallow, something based only on chemistry or physical desire. But when we place attraction within the boundaries of purpose and commitment, it becomes a meaningful thread in the fabric of a strong, lasting connection. The touch of a woman, when coming from genuine affection and emotional draw, can be a beautiful expression. But it must be received and interpreted with wisdom, because every touch, however small, either draws people toward clarity or toward confusion. This is where the heart must be guarded. For just as attraction can lead to intimacy, it can also lead to disappointment if not handled properly. A godly man understands this. He does not fear attraction, but neither does he rush into it blindly. He recognizes that a woman's touch, her interest, her attention, all of these can be gifts when approached with intention. And he also understands that these gifts, when received outside of their proper time or place, can become distractions or even stumbling blocks. In a God-ordained relationship, attraction becomes a catalyst for deeper communication, mutual respect, and shared vision. The small gestures, like the way she touches his arm when laughing, or how she lingers in physical nearness, can be signs of something growing. But growth without guidance can turn into chaos. That is why the man who seeks God's wisdom will not only recognize these signs, but also ask, what am I building here? Is this moment leading us closer to purpose or simply closer to impulse? There's a reason the scriptures encourage patience and discernment in love. The Song of Songs cautions not to awaken love before its time. Why? Because love awakened too early, based solely on physical or emotional attraction, often lacks the roots needed to survive storms. But love that grows with intention, under the covering of wisdom, is strong. It honors both individuals. It protects them. It builds something that reflects God's design. So when a woman touches a man in a way that reveals attraction, the question is not merely, is she interested? But what is God saying in this moment? That is where real clarity comes. That's where attraction begins to serve its purpose, not to stir up confusion, but to reveal potential. And with that potential comes responsibility to slow down, to seek direction, and to act with honor. In the end, attraction is not something to suppress, but something to steward. It is a signal, not a destination. It invites a response, but demands wisdom. And when it is placed in the hands of those who fear God, who seek to honor Him in every relationship, it becomes a beautiful beginning to something far deeper than desire. It becomes the starting point of love rooted in truth. In every relationship, there comes a time when intentions must be examined. While attraction often begins with subtle signals, smiles, shared glances, the occasional gentle touch, those signs gradually give way to something more significant: discernment. Discernment is the ability to look beyond the surface and recognize what's truly happening beneath the moment. The third keynote reminds us that recognizing the signs of physical attraction, especially through touch, is not about seeking opportunity. It's about seeking clarity. It's about discerning whether the interaction is momentary or meaningful, whether it is rooted in truth or simply emotion. When a woman touches a man, perhaps briefly on the shoulder, lightly on the arm, or even on the chest, Those actions may be charged with feeling, but feeling does not always equal intention. This is why discernment is so critical. A man must not only ask himself what is being communicated, but also what is being cultivated. Because what begins with a touch often leads to deeper expectations, whether spoken or not. And those expectations, if left unchecked, can pull two people in directions they are not prepared to go. Discernment gives a man the ability to pause and ask the right questions. Is this person simply being friendly, or is there something deeper being expressed? Is this moment leading us into emotional vulnerability too soon? Is her interest based on genuine connection, or is it shaped by circumstance or need? These questions don't arise from fear or suspicion. They arise from wisdom, and wisdom guards the heart. One of the greatest challenges in male-female relationships is misunderstanding intentions. What seems innocent to one may be interpreted as significant by the other. That's why physical touch must never be taken lightly. A hand on the arm, when given in passing, may be forgotten by one person and remembered by another. A lingering touch during conversation might be a moment of openness or a moment of testing. Without discernment, a man may respond with assumption instead of clarity, with eagerness instead of patience. The world tells us to follow our feelings, but Scripture teaches us to test the spirit of things, to measure them, to weigh them, to ask if they align with God's truth. Discernment is not about seeing what we want to see, but about seeing what is really there. A woman's touch may be warm, affirming, and sincere, but it may also be a test, a way to measure the man's response, a moment to see if he will lead the moment or fall into it. The man who walks in discernment knows that not every invitation must be accepted. Not every spark must be fanned into a flame. Sometimes the wisest thing a man can do is to slow down, to appreciate the connection, but not to leap into it, to acknowledge the interest, but to seek God's confirmation before taking the next step. Because while physical connection may come quickly, emotional and spiritual connection take time, intention, and care. Discernment also protects the woman involved. For if she is testing her own heart, unsure of her feelings, the man's ability to respond with restraint and maturity becomes a gift to her. Instead of escalating the moment into something neither person is ready for, he honors the situation by holding space, by allowing the relationship to unfold naturally in truth rather than in rush. In doing so, he honors not just her body or her feelings, but her dignity. It is easy to react to attraction. It is much harder to respond to it with wisdom. And yet, that is what discernment demands. It asks us to look beyond the moment and consider the long term. What will this choice lead to? What kind of foundation are we laying in this relationship? Is it one of trust and respect, or one of confusion and desire? Discernment answers these questions not with emotion, but with truth. In a culture where touch is often used casually, the man of God must treat it reverently. Not fearfully, but reverently. He must recognize that physical signals, especially those initiated by a woman, are not meaningless. They are invitations, not just into her space, but perhaps into her story, her emotions, her expectations. And to step into that space without clarity is to risk much more than the moment. Therefore, when attraction is expressed through touch, it is not a time to drift. It is a time to discern, a time to seek understanding, a time to ask, what does this mean? And even more importantly, what is the right way to respond? With discernment, a man gains the insight to navigate moments of closeness with grace and to build something lasting, not on impulse, but on wisdom. Guarding the heart is one of the most important principles in building meaningful, lasting relationships. In a world that often encourages impulsive decisions and emotionally driven connections, learning how to engage with others, especially in moments of attraction, requires intentionality, spiritual maturity, and self-control. The fourth keynote emphasizes that while attraction and physical touch can feel exciting and affirming, they must be handled with grace and guided by a deeper commitment to purity, respect, and clarity. Engaging with another person in a way that honors both them and God begins by guarding your own heart and interacting with purpose. Attraction, by its very nature, draws two people closer. It brings a sense of emotional energy, of curiosity, and sometimes even vulnerability. When a woman reaches out and touches a man in a way that indicates interest, whether gently on his arm, affectionately on his shoulder, or softly on his chest, those moments can stir feelings of validation, hope, and desire. But feelings are not always faithful guides. They can be genuine and yet still lead someone into confusion if left unexamined. That is why the heart must be protected, not just from others, but from our own tendency to rush ahead without wisdom. A man who is emotionally grounded and spiritually aware does not view attraction as something to fear or avoid. Rather, he sees it as something to steward. He understands that the ability to feel deeply is a gift, but a gift that must be aligned with truth. Guarding the heart doesn't mean building walls or shutting down connection. It means putting boundaries in place to keep what is sacred from being exposed too soon. It means responding to attraction not with passivity or impulsiveness, but with measured grace. Grace is what allows us to respond to interest without exploitation. When a woman shows signs of affection, she is offering a small part of her trust. Whether consciously or not, she is placing emotional weight into that moment. For the man on the receiving end, that moment becomes an opportunity not to take advantage, but to uphold honor. Responding with grace means not leading her on, not playing with her interest, and not encouraging a deeper connection unless you are ready to pursue it with sincerity and commitment. It means honoring her gesture even while establishing healthy emotional and physical boundaries. Far too often, relationships begin with a spark of interest but crumble under the weight of emotional entanglement without clarity. That's what happens when attraction is handled without wisdom. But when grace is present, when both people are willing to guard their hearts and communicate honestly, something beautiful can unfold. There is room for interest to grow, for connection to deepen, but also for each person to remain grounded in who they are and where they're going. Grace also means not assuming too much based on a single touch or moment. Sometimes people are exploring their own emotions, still unsure of their intentions. Not every gesture is a green light, and not every interaction is a promise. Guarding your heart means giving space to understand what the other person is truly feeling, rather than projecting your hopes or desires onto the situation. It's in that space that truth has room to surface. And where there is truth, there is freedom, not to act recklessly, but to build something honest. This process calls for humility. It requires setting aside ego and asking, what does it look like to protect this woman's heart while also protecting mine? That question alone can change the course of a relationship, because once two people are drawn together by emotion, it's easy to ignore red flags or rush into decisions that feel right in the moment, but cause pain down the road. Guarding the heart helps prevent those missteps by keeping you centered in wisdom rather than impulse. It's important to recognize, too, that guarding the heart doesn't eliminate attraction. It clarifies it. It helps separate emotional truth from emotional reaction. It filters what's real from what's simply exciting. And it creates the safety needed for a relationship to grow in a way that's healthy, intentional, and God-honoring. Ultimately, attraction is part of the human design, but it was never meant to lead us, only to invite us into deeper discernment. Physical touch can be a beautiful sign of closeness, but without boundaries, it can also lead us away from clarity. That's why we must engage every interaction with grace, to protect the heart, to honor the person in front of us, and to walk in a way that reflects the patience, kindness, and self-control we are called to live by. In doing so, we not only guard our hearts, but we prepare them for something far greater, love that is rooted in truth, nurtured by wisdom, and sustained by grace.